Hello everyone, I'm Professor Mark Baines with Concordia University, and the coursework today coincides with week 6 of our exercise physiology course, or advanced exercise physiology, and we're talking specifically about acid-base balance and temperature regulation, which may not sound like exciting concepts, but they are very, very important to understand in terms of recognizing the levels of stress an athlete can withstand and understanding how to manage those variables so we can maintain or improve performance on a given day or a given week over the course of a season and beyond. That said, talking first about some concepts that need to be clarified, referring to movement skill. If you want to move better, the goal is to improve motor control, motor development, moving better as a whole, seeing those kinds of improvements come. Then progress needs to be gradual. The tempo needs to be slow everything down. As soon as control is lost, fluidity is not there, they've lost skill in some capacity, slow it down for whatever you're doing. Number one rule, right? Reduce the range of motion where necessary as well. Certainly reduce the force output expectation. That said, it should be longer duration activity. They should be able to do it. If it's controllable, if it's sustainable, you should be able to control it for longer periods. If not, you're exceeding their basic motor skill, their basic movement skill capacity. Keep that intensity low, okay? And you do as often as you need to, whenever you need to, whenever it appears that skill is lacking. Now, if it's fatigue in general, well, it's not going to happen. We're going to have to have lower expectations for a given day, right? We don't want to confuse fatigue with actually lack of skill. Golgi tendon activation, organ activation versus muscular fatigue. We don't want to confuse you getting fatigued in the middle of a longer set, which has to do more with pH decreasing, greater acidosis, lactate levels increasing, not lactic acid, blood lactate levels increasing. We're talking about cortisol levels certainly increasing. We're talking about basically anything that's going to inhibit muscular contraction at a given point with excess hydrogen ions and binding with troponin sites to actually inhibit calcium ions inability then to be able to help muscular contraction occur. All those kinds of things are not the same as GTO basically saying, there's too much tension here, release. Which is really not about fatigue. It's about just protection from extreme levels of force protection requirement that are beyond what the GTO is interpreting to be too much, or it's done too fast. Right? And that usually happens at the beginning of an exercise or the beginning of an effort, as opposed to, or an incredible dramatic change you're trying to make in an effort, as opposed to fatiguing, right? An injury should not be confused with fatigue from the standpoint of an injury to a muscle. We're talking about days, weeks, or more to recover from it. Whereas just basic fatigue should be a few hours and you're okay. You may not be able to produce the same exact level of force in just a few hours if you had a particularly challenging session, but generally speaking, fatigue should be gone. It shouldn't be there. Don't confuse the inability of producing proper force with actual fatigue. It's not the same, okay? Cardiac output, ideally, we're talking about a high stroke volume and a lower heart rate. Although heart rate and stroke volume both have a component involvement in cardiac output, the more cardiac output that is required, the more you're going to see arise beginning initially with stroke volume and eventually with heart rate. The more you see the heart rate go up, the less stroke volume is playing a role, which means they're performing anaerobically more and more. That's what you're seeing. When you see that stroke volume unable to keep increasing, it's actually decreasing, which it will over time at a given intensity, and heart rate's going up. The person's working more and more at an anaerobic type level, the more that is seen, okay? So the primary way to improve that stroke volume is working at or around the lactate threshold, fairly low to moderate intensity. We'll talk more about that here shortly. Heart rate variability differences, make sure we now understand that the primary goal is a lower heart rate in general. It is. It's always a lower heart rate. That is the primary goal, okay? We're not going to say get your heart rate down to the lowest it possibly can be with everything you possibly do, like we're going to try to say, the heart rate should be down. It's up a little bit. Doesn't mean it's not okay to go up a little bit, but generally speaking, we have to understand what our ceiling rate is. Don't go above that ceiling rate on a given day based on the expectations of force output, duration of activity, and thereby understanding, therefore, what someone should be at, roughly a VO2 max. We're talking about heart rate in particular here, or any given level of output. I think we mentioned in past weeks, I don't care if you're doing push-ups, or if you're doing squats, or if you're outside running, or you're swimming, whatever you're doing, you should have a heart rate monitor on you, because those monitors can be utilized at any time, water-wise, in space, anywhere, okay? You should have it on you. And that will give you much more greater recognition of what's happening internally as opposed to what's happening externally, what you're seeing in terms of force output. But that said, what should theoretically happen with someone who's very fit and rested. They have a low resting heart rate with high stroke volume, and they're also going to have high variability of their heart rate as well. During at rest, specifically, timing between beats is all over the place. If you could actually hear the heart rate, it'd be jumping everywhere. It would still be low as a whole over the course of a minute, right? But it would be jumping all over the place. Whereas the unfit person will have a higher resting heart rate, probably by 10, 15, 20 beats or more than a fitter person, just laying there resting just after waking up. However, the variability is quite low. They're actually going to have very much a consistent beat, which is actually an indicator of someone's unreadiness for more challenging or higher intensity activity. If they have a very consistent heart rate at rest, they have low variability, they're not ready on a given day, because a fit person who normally has a low resting heart rate and is now elevated it a little bit up because they're tired and worn down is probably also going to see some decreased variability in their heart rate, which is again an indicator also of someone's inability to perform at higher levels today without causing undue stress or harm to them and not seeing longer term benefit in conditioning and performance improvement. Okay. And that said, how do we train that? Well, we actually would have to have a heart monitor that actually can monitor variability, not just heart rate alone. And then we will know when they're getting to the point where they are exceeding their capacity for handling work at an aerobic type level, and consequently where we might start to see some decline in performance. Okay, at least if it's expected to be held for longer periods. That said, heart rate and homeostasis. We want to try to get the heart rate back down as soon as possible whenever we're engaged in higher intensity type activities. The faster the heart rate can come back down, the greater recognition that is of someone's conditioning. Some people have used heart rate as you got to get your heart rate back down to below 120 before you begin your next set during like high intensity type interval type work and whatnot. And that's not wrong. However, probably a better way of looking at it is how fast does it come down? It should be coming down at least 20-30 beats, within a minute. Bare minimum. If it doesn't come down 20-30 beats in a minute, we're talking about someone has to go high intensity. If you don't go that high intensity, it's not going to go up enough to see a big drop. But if they go higher intensity and they can't recover 20-30 beats or more in a given minute, they're probably going to see one of two things. You could force the issue and have them keep going. Performance is going to wane very, very soon if it by the next set or the set thereafter, for sure. Okay, maybe already. Okay, they won't have the same level of force output the next set around, or at least the next set or two. They're about done. Okay, and that being said, you want to see that heart rate be able to recover quickly enough whereby the faster it does recover, the sooner they're ready to go back to work. That's certainly true, and that is ultimately the goal here. We're trying to encourage the benefit from higher intensity sessions. We want to see a faster recovery and a greater ability to be able to recover quickly and produce force again right away. We can't do that by forcing the issue and saying automatically it's always this short rest period. No, it depends very much upon the individual, and we're talking about high intensity sets. High intensity. We're really getting up in that range of the 85+% force output. Some circles refer to, including the textbook, force output above 70% is high intensity. Now, you could say that 70-75%. Usually it's more like 75 to 80% or above. But that being said, depending upon the person, high intensity may be much, much higher force output relative to their max, what they can maintain for longer periods. So it's going to be different for everyone. However, generally speaking, 85% and above, force output wise, is going to be high intensity for just about everybody. Just whatever they're capable of handling at 100%, 85% of that is going to be high force output, high intensity sets. They're not going to be able to go for probably more than 90 seconds unless you're talking about some otherworldly athlete at those kinds of levels. And that said, they're going to need 90 seconds to 2 minutes or 3 minutes and beyond for rest. Where does the 90 seconds come in? If it's still glycolytic, if I look at about 30 seconds or maybe a little longer work period, maybe even 20 seconds for some high-level individuals can recover in 90 seconds, come back and do it again. That's unusual, okay, but possible. However, we start going for high force output, we're expecting faster or higher levels of force output. Work period is going to need to be going down below 20 seconds, and rest period is going to need to be going up more towards that 2 minutes and eventually 3 minutes and beyond. Okay, but don't confuse internal versus external work. In order to get 100% force output, you're going to have to give 100% effort. It's just that simple. You cannot have your personal max without giving 100% effort. That's impossible. But that should not be confused with this expectation we often have in sport of 100% effort all the time. We love to say that, and it's just not physically possible. And if you actually try to do that, you'll have lesser athletes. It's just that simple. You can't do it. Your effort can look higher than the people around you, certainly. Absolutely, but you can't get 100% effort all the time. It doesn't work like that. It won't work that way, okay? So don't confuse that. Proper cardiovascular training can reduce heart attack damage by up to 60%. It's a very impressive stat. In as little as 3 to 5 days in a row, consecutive exercise, around 60 minutes. If it's 60 minutes, we're talking about lactate threshold type work, right? For low unfit people, 40-50% of their VO2 max level, upward to about up to 85% VO2 max for the higher level conditioned individuals for up to 60 minutes or around 60 minutes, 3 to 5 days in a row can have a dramatic effect in protecting you against heart attacks. Even one day can protect you for the next 24 hours. However, dramatic reduction in anything, if you actually had a heart attack, you'd have dramatically less stress or damage, we should say, because of how healthy you are before that attack occurred. That's a reason for doing it, right? For those who aren't just looking at performance benefit from sport. Stroke volume plateaus at around 40-60% VO2 max, somewhere in there, or pretty much around lactate threshold, right? For deconditioned individuals. However, stroke volume can keep increasing up to actual VO2 max, up to a high level of effort, if the person's very, very fit and well conditioned, because they've done a lot of lower level work before they build upward toward the more high intensity sessions. And if you haven't already found this, I've alluded to it in the past, but if you haven't already found it, here's the website for you can get for getting a real good idea about the expectation of VO2 max versus heart rate, the relationship. You're going to see the heart rate be higher than the VO2 max pretty much all the way up until you get up to that 90-95% plus VO2 max level effort, where you see the heart rate being fairly similar. But that said, otherwise you'll see a 40% VO2 max is around 60%, give or take, VO2 max, right? There's somewhere in that range. So I want to make sure you understand those relationships. And RPE is going to always be that level 10 if we're talking about ATP, CP type work, or at least 9.5 out of 10, right? If you're not given 9.5 out of 10, you're not going to get 95% of your actual maximal force output, so it's just not going to be there. RPE has to be high for high intensity sessions. It has to be. Now, for yourself, right? We're talking about output relative to someone's capabilities. The best athlete can give less effort, and actually everybody else is going high intensity all out, and the best athlete might be given more like 7 or 8 RPE at the best, at the most, and yet still exceeding the levels of those around them. That's certainly possible, but it should not be confused with their actual output, which is why it's a big mistake in sport to simply go, okay, all the DBs, defensive backs, they need to be through at this amount of time, as opposed to understanding each athlete more specifically, and some are going to be better conditioned than others, and not just meaning a general standard time, but knowing what each athlete's best times are and making them pursue those times. That's where we're going to see the maximal benefits from everyone, the maximal improvement. That's hard to do. It takes a lot of effort and recording and reminders to the athletes themselves, but it's how we're going to get the most out of them. Okay. We've got to find the right intensity versus higher or lower or moderate. It all depends on someone's needs in a given moment in time. Hopefully you've understood that now. Now, important concepts going into the 6th week here. We're actually technically right around the halfway point, or just above the halfway point this week. Acid-base balance and hydrogen ions. Whenever your stress levels increase significantly, whenever force output or internal effort, if you will, actual internal effort, not perception like RPE, that's rate of perceived exertion, right? But actual internal effort, because it's not necessarily going to be the same level as work. You might be working hard on a bad day, you're giving everything you got, but your actual force output's 70, 75, 80% of your normal force, of your maximal force output. That's not good, right? However, what should ideally be the case is your effort feels similar to the actual output as a percentage of your max. That's when you're really ready for higher intensity type sessions. However, regardless, once you pursue a work level that's somewhere in that range of above 75-80% force output, or certainly above that 75-80% VO2 max range, putting your heart rate potentially. And when it says, when you look at the correlation between heart rate and VO2 max, that 75% of VO2 max is roughly about 85% maximal heart rate. It doesn't mean the moment you're engaging at the effort of about 75% VO2 max, your heart rate immediately goes to that number. It means it will gradually get up to that point when you're holding that level of effort for 45 seconds or minutes and beyond. It doesn't mean the heart rate's going to immediately go there right away, which is also why we have to be careful when we say things like heart rate should be this amount. Not by second number 1 within a given set. That's at the end. That's what it should be up to, not should be, the expectation it will probably be. Don't confuse the two. Doesn't mean you have to get there heart rate-wise, but the expectation is it'll probably be roughly around that realm. That's what we're talking about when we see a relationship between VO2 max and heart rate. The expectation of the heart rate by the end of the exertion period at the most. If it's more than that, you're going to probably see a drop in performance, if not now, in successive sets. And the excess hydrogen ions are a very natural process that occurs along this acidosis internally when work periods go for longer durations of work at moderately higher intensities. Okay. Acidosis potential effect now, clarifying kind of what we've been saying. pH going below 7.4 typically is basically the expectation of the normal pH blood level balance, acid and base. And that said, excess hydrogen ions are increasing internally based upon basically the breaking apart of ATP and the transfer of energy and excess hydrogen ions that occur as a result of that. Blood lactate levels are increasing, and this begins around, roughly speaking, this acidosis around 50 to 60% of VO2 max. Not a very high level. It begins somewhere in there, around anything that's held 45 seconds or longer. Now, it'll begin maybe at similar point for someone who's engaging exercise versus another athlete. However, the person who's, of course, more well conditioned won't see as high a development of acidosis as quickly as well a person who has lesser conditioning. Okay. Buffers, where your body has all sorts of internal buffers that work very, very hard to try to reduce the blood pH, or actually increase blood pH, excuse me, when you have acidosis be a problem. We're trying to get the proper enzymatic responses, trying to get the proper blood flow to get oxygen and nutrients back to the tissues, and to maintain homeostasis, or at least maintain a steady state whereby your body can help you recover from the stress you're undergoing right now. Now, for that to occur, you need time. What does that mean? Well, it means you're going to either take rest, complete rest, or at least reduce the intensity dramatically. When the goal is not endurance, then you want to stop activity pretty much altogether, other than something that's like such a light activity that's 20-30%, give or take, maximal force output, certainly not more than 30-40%, the very, very most, and allow yourself to recover before going back and doing it again. If you're looking at maybe higher intensity type sessions. If we're trying to go 90, 95, 100% force output, complete and total break for that 3 to 5 minute period, and then having a brief time. This is so frequently forgotten. If you're going to be sprinting, if you ran a 40-yard dash at maximal speed and you rested 3 to 5 minutes before you ran a 40-yard dash, rather than getting back on the line and going right now, you should be running a couple strides. Build back up again at lower levels of force output before you come back to the line and go again. You'd be amazed the level of force output you can actually get from that. If you have maximal squat or deadlift or max bench press, something like that for maximal strength in the gym, before you went back and tried to do that again, whether it's something you do in a few 5 seconds or 10 seconds of work, rather than, we know 1 rep is 1 rep. We know we can either do it or we can't. But rather than counting for 2 or 3 reps, can you keep that weight moving for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, somewhere in there, or somewhere in that time frame, or maybe beyond? Okay. But that said, we rest long enough to buffer those internal acids, buffer the acidosis, and actually that's what we're waiting for ATP to fully replenish and come back and remove all the metabolic waste. And those are the time frames we're waiting for. Now, we can take in certain things like carnosine, beta-alanine, and Dutex does a great job at showing you can improve performance, particularly the endurance levels above 10%. That's a dramatic number for someone engaging in activity for, we're talking about 20-30 minutes and beyond, not someone who's probably engaging in it basically a 4 or 5 minute, like a mile run. If you're going to improve your performance by 10% for a mile run, it's probably not going to see that big of an improvement by taking in a couple of supplements. But the endurance athletes in particular are the ones who can benefit the most the longer they go, and seeing performance benefits from supplementation really, really be helpful. Something to look into. It's something we want to realize we're talking about as a very secondary concept for what we're talking about here, which is exercise physiology, the benefits from exercise. We can enhance our performance with supplementation, but just like food must come before supplementation, recognizing the importance of how we exercise and what we do with that exercise is far more important than worrying about the supplements we take in addition to our training. Get the training down first, then we start looking at supplementation. Okay. Blood flow with hot or cold environments. Well, when it's hot, but your blood's trying to flow away from the skin, and actually the skin can actually get cold. They start sweating, whatnot, right? Whereas basically, so I'm sorry, when it's cold, going to rush inward, going to try to protect the organs and the tissues. Where it's hot, and blood rushes outward more toward the skin layer. Okay, and that said, when you're sweating, if you are sweating profusely, and we're talking about someone turning basically white, the risk is something we refer to as heat exhaustion. Okay, heat exhaustion is not life-threatening. However, it does mean activities should cease altogether. Person needs to get in a cool area, drink plenty of water, get as cool as possible. Maybe it's a cold shower. We're not talking about something as serious as an ice bath yet. We're not talking about 911 call yet. However, when they stop sweating, if you were sweating a moment ago and you're still exerting and now you stop sweating, if you got to pay attention to those kinds of moments. And by the way, heat exhaustion is still very recognizable also by someone being disoriented. Balance a little bit off. If you're paying attention to movement skill and technical capabilities, watching someone's form, not letting athletes get to the kind of moments, as we jokingly talk about a lot. If you don't ever get there, you've never got anything to worry about the heat exhaustion, the heat stroke. If you don't see the dramatic breakdown in performance, you're not going to be seeing these dramatically dangerous levels of exertion whereby someone pushes into heat exhaustion or more dangerously into heat stroke. When they stop sweating, the skin is actually red, and actually the person may actually pass out, and very well might. In which case, if they're doing that in an environment in practice, I cannot be any more clear in this, the coach is doing something wrong. The coach is doing something wrong. Either the level of expectation is too high from an output standpoint, or the coaches are not paying enough attention to their athletes to recognize the difference between a person working hard and getting tired and a person pushing way beyond their capacity for work. How will you know? By tracking everything. Let's not just run 10 gassers. Let's not just run 10, 15, 20 suicides or lines in volleyball or basketball. Let's make sure we're clear about, okay, the standard of time you should normally be able to run, you can't run it. Was that an expectation of you didn't run hard enough? Or was it because you're tired? If form was breaking down and they couldn't make the time they normally would make, if you're paying attention, they're fatigued, it's over, it's done. Don't get mad and angry, yell at them and tell them keep going. They're done. If form didn't break down and they just didn't run as fast, probably a question of effort. There's a difference. Okay. Water intake, you want to make sure we're drinking at least, as we said, enough water. We're going to the bathroom every 2 hours. Okay, certainly if they have a 2 hour or more practice, if they're not going to the bathroom during a 3 hour practice at least once, I remember in football we had some 3+ hour practices. Coaches would get angry with you if you went to the restroom. Well, we're dehydrated then during practice, coach. If we've been out here for 3 hours and no one's gone to the restroom at all, we're dehydrated. Shouldn't be that long. 2 hours, less than 2 hour practice. Okay, it's not unheard of to think someone's not ready to go to the bathroom again right away. You may have heard in some circles referring to research that would say when you're engaging high-intensity activity, the body naturally shuts down the need to excrete waste and go to the bathroom, so you shouldn't have those needs or should not be feeling that until you cease activity. That's true to a point. It just depends on how significant it is the person has to use the restroom. It really comes down to that, really. But that said, we're talking about at least 5 to 10 ounces, and most research I've seen before this particular textbook refer to at least 6 to 8 ounces every 10-15 minutes. Your textbook refers to 5 to 10 ounces every 15 to 20 minutes. So you're looking at the bare minimum of 5 ounces every 20 minutes, the absolute bare minimum, which is pretty low for most people, and the high end of 10 ounces every 20 minutes. Okay, whereas I prefer to be a little safer and go a little more frequently, a little bit lighter on those numbers from 6 to 8 ounces every 10-15 minutes to make sure they're getting the water breaks. Allow them to take water breaks when they need them. For your athletes, always, when they want to get a little bit of water, to go do that, but not to drink too much. Even better if you regulate it. You put little cups out, go drink a cup of water. Everybody grab 1 cup of water. Not go drink something out of the drinking fountain or drink a bunch of your own water, something they can actually see and actually measure the water they're taking in. And then they'll also start to get a feel for if they're having a need to go to the restroom, if they're getting too much and whatnot. Weight loss. You can lose a pound or 2 or maybe even more during high-intensity training sessions or prolonged training sessions. Remember, anything more than 10 minutes is technically prolonged, but prolonged from a standpoint of individual exertion, something that's long for you, right? You may see some weight loss from water loss. Any weight loss during the session itself is predominantly water loss. Maybe some metabolism of some food to some extent, but for the most part, it's water loss. We don't gain or lose muscle in a given session. It's a much longer process over the course of days and weeks and beyond, okay, gaining or losing muscle and fat. You didn't lose a bunch of fat or muscle just now in that hour. I'm sorry. It'd be so nice if it worked like that. It doesn't work like that, okay? You cannot physiologically gain or lose more than 1 pound or 2 of muscle or fat in a given week. Cannot physically be done. That being said, that assumes you're doing the best you possibly could. If you're actually to gain 1 pound or 2 of muscle, it would be phenomenal. To actually lose 1 pound or 2 of fat, be phenomenal. You might still have a net weight gain or loss of several pounds because a majority of it's going to be water. The bigger the athlete, the bigger the weight change fluctuations under high intensity or longer duration activity changes. However, it's going to be majority water every single time. Okay, it's water loss. And however much water you lost in a given hour or beyond, you want to be taking back in 1.5 to double what you lost over the course of the next 3 to 5 hours, the very, very least. Okay, but coping with those extremes, we don't want to see dramatic changes in weight loss and water take. We want to see as much consistency as we can. We don't want to miss days of moving, but we're certainly going to need to adapt high intensity with lower intensity or moderate intensity. We have to do a much better job of that than all of us have in the past with coaching our athletes. And the more we see decreases in performance, the more we need to take a step back, increasing rest periods, working more toward the lower intensity type sessions so we can build up in those times where we're ready for high intensity sessions to get the highest outputs. It's always shocking to me whenever I give an athlete a little more rest than maybe they're used to, all of a sudden their output goes up tremendously. What a shock. Oh, you just need a little more rest. Yeah, sometimes it's that simple. I wish it always was, but sometimes it's as simple as that. Final thoughts. None of you are really frequently using the concept of so-and-so said or this site said. When you make a statement like research shows, or be careful with research shows, some research has shown, is a better way of putting that, but definitely don't say so-and-so said this. We're not trying to cite what someone else said. We want to make sure we cite the research. You want to cite where the information was you came from. One of the reasons I want to get away from you quoting people and quoting research, because I want to show that you understand it. And in some situations, I can tell when, you can tell, anybody can tell when someone's talking a little above maybe their pay grade, so to speak, talking a little bit above what they probably know, using a lot of big words in there because it's maybe not your background just yet. Be careful with trying to change a few keywords, but keeping the same sentences that you're actually looking at in your research. Make sure that you actually read through it and just sum it up in your own words, and then cite it specifically, and just state the gist of what you're getting. But don't quote too many sources as much as you can. Maybe a word. You liked a word or a couple words. Don't quote entire sentences. Okay, try to avoid doing that when you can. I know that's not often said like that, but it's really not showing that you're actually obtaining the information. It's just showing you're repeating something that was already told to you. I want to make sure you're actually gaining the concepts, because ultimately when it comes down to it, it's what you can apply with what you know, as opposed to just repeating something you've heard in the past. And we're all guilty of it. We all do it. Okay, but we're trying to avoid as much as we can. Citation consistency is the key. Make sure you're attaching your articles and not just citing the research articles in APA format. Some of you are still citing textbooks and books as primary research. It is not primary. That is secondary. Anybody who writes a book or even a textbook is taking research and they're writing a book based on some of that research. Whereas you'd be using the research articles as the basis for your citation, for your post in discussion boards and whatnot. And remember, the discussion boards are where you're showing your application the most. Your Learn Smarts are showing you read the material, you're getting a basic understanding. Your tests are making sure you understand some of the broader concepts you should be knowing. Your paper is an opportunity to take some time to focus on research, an area of particular interest for you, which you just completed, right? The only paper you have to actually complete. What I really hope you'll do is take the comments I've given to you from those papers and use it for future papers, or at least your own future research, whether you ever write a paper again after your master's program is over, all depending if you go into future research, right? But use those skills for your own research and being clear about how careful you are with taking something as fact versus a possibility, something to take into consideration. Right? It's painful. Research is not easy. Anyone who says research is easy is not really researching. Anyone says they love research, what they're really saying is they love the information they get from the research. Actually loving the work, they're a little bit of a weird person. And that's okay. We need the weird people too. That's a lot of researchers kind of have to be, to love that stuff. But that said, what we all need to be loving is what you can glean from the research. The research itself can be difficult to do, but the information we can use to apply for the betterment of the people we're trying to help is what we're looking for in the long term, isn't it? That said, if you have questions, if you need any help, as always, let me know. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon.